Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Beis in the Dharma as we start the new Masechet. Learn for a Forshana for Elazar ben Reuma. This Masechet is Nadarim, right? We're talking about making vows and oaths. And for those of you who have the old style Gemaras that have several Masechtas in there, usually Nadarim, Nazir, and Sota go together. I don't know if any of you have that, but I have the old Gemaras have Nadarim and Sota too. So Sota gives us a hint. The beginning of Sota tells us a hint as to why this Masechet is here. After all, we're learning Nashim now, right? Nashim, we started with Yavamos, Ksubas. What do Nadarim have to do here? So the Gemara in Sota discusses the whole order. There it talks about why is Nazir mentioned as the Sota. The famous Lashon of Rebbe is that whoever sees a Sota b'kokula, when you see her in her ruin, what's happened to her after all, she's gone astray. So why does that happen? Because people drink too much and people become intoxicated and frivolous. So if you see a sota, be careful and don't drink too much wine. Yazar Asmanayan, a person should prohibit himself from drinking wine. Okay, that's why Nazir and sota go together. So the Gemara says, so say sota first and then Nazir. The Gemara says, well, first we learn Nadarim. Why? Because in Ksivas we had a parak that says Hamadir es ishto. Person forswore his wife from having anah from him, or him having anah from her. So there we talked about, in Ksubas we talked about Nadarim. So after we learn Ksubas, that's why we learn Nadarim. The Gemara in Sota tells us this. Now the Gemara doesn't tell us right here at the beginning, but it tells us that that's why Nadarim is learned right after Ksubas, even though Nadarim and is not really part of the Nashim. After all, Shvuas, the Masechta Shvuas, we talk about Masechta Shvuas, that's in Nezikin Bechlal. It's coming the next Seder that we're going to learn Mitzvah after we finish Nadarim, Nazir, Sota, Gittin, and Kedushin. Right? After we finish all that, next year sometime, we will then go back to Nezikin, and then we learn about Shvuas. So Nadarim really should be there, but because Ksubas had a parak that was a Hamadir es ishto, so we learn Nadarim. Okay, Nazir is like a netter too, because how do you become a Nazir? By taking a netter that you're going to prohibit yourself from wine and being tummy, etc., etc. So Nazir is then related to Nadarim, and once we learn Nazir, then we say Sota, which is really the reason why Nazir belongs in Nashim, because we said whoever sees a Sota b'kufula should Yazir Asmanayin. So therefore, the basic reason why Nazir is in Nashim is because of Sota. Nazir and Sota is related, but Nazir is also related to Nadarim, and Nadarim is related to Ksubas, as we mentioned. Therefore, that's the reason for the order here. So the Mishnah starts off like this: how do you make a netter? A netter, we said yesterday, is you prohibit the item itself on you. A shvu is where you prohibit yourself from the item, and there's a big nafkaminas in terms of what you're over on, what the punishments can be. We'll talk about all that later on. But besides the main kind of a netter, you could easily say, Ron explains here, you could easily say that the netter is, this is usher to me, period. You didn't have to say it's usher to me like a carbon. Mention if I say this is usher to me like chazir, that's not saying anything. Chazir is the Torah forbade that. If I say your coffee is usher to me like chazir, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because it's not usher. Chazir, the Torah prohibited from. But if I say that coffee is also to me like a carbon that I prohibited myself from, like a carbon I prohibit myself. A carbon doesn't become hegdish until you make it holy. It's got to be dafka something that is chulin. You can't take something which is holy and make it holy for a different purpose. So a carbon I prohibited myself on, and then it's also actually the difference is, of course, a carbon is also for everybody because once it's hegdish, whereas a netter, I can prohibit any item on myself. As we'll see later on, I could also prohibit my items on you. But I can't prohibit your items on you or any other items, but I could say all oranges in the world are forbidden for me, or all meat is also to me. I could do that. I can't say all meat is also to you. I could prohibit my stuff on you. We'll talk about that later on. Okay, so the basic kind of a netter is I prohibited something, this item is also to me. That's it. And if I say, the Ron explains, you could either say it without holding it on or grabbing on or relating it to a carbon, but the preferred way is to relate it to a carbon, to say this is also to me like a carbon is also to me. That's the basic way you make a netter. Then there's another thing called substitutes.
I never understood. That's a qualification of a general netter, right? If I say this,
no, it's not. It's not just. It's also like, yeah. Yo,
The light is a qualification.
yeah, it's not really. It's not qualifying that it's not also like other things. It's also to me like a carbon is also to me in all aspects. In all aspects, it's not like sounds like a qualification, but it's not really qualifying it in by saying that it's less.
To me,
In every aspect.
aspect.
In every aspect. You can't have any enough from it. That means it's also you in every aspect, like a carbon. Or you could say without it, but if you say it with a carbon, that's usually the way you do it. Then there's a way to do it where you didn't use the lashon of carbon, but you said a substitute lashon, a kinui, a nickname. So if you did it that way, that's also usher, as we'll see. That's also usher min Torah. All this is making a netter. Netter means it's prohibited to you, and if you violate it, you're over on a lav. In certain cases, you bring a carbon. If it's a kind of a shvur, we'll talk about it in general, though. I'm over on a lav. The beginning of Matos says, what does it say? Ish ki or netter Hashem, o ishav shvur Hashem, lo yachel dvaro. And if you over on the losa say with an action, for example, I say this sandwich is also to me like a carbon, and then I eat the sandwich. I'm chayiv malchus for that. So we'll talk about all this later on. If you did it b'shogeg, or if you did it b'mezid, if you did it b'mezid and asra, then you're chayiv malchus. We'll talk about all this. We'll discuss later on.
Aside, a general question. Aside from the fact that the Torah says you shouldn't make a netter, what's the problem with making a netter?
You're allowed to make a netter. You're allowed to make a netter. You just have to fulfill it.
No, I'm saying, what's the problem?
There's no problem. Just fulfill it. No, Pasuk says no. No. The issue is keep your word. A word is a word. What? Oh, because you didn't keep your word. You didn't keep your word because you violated your word. You violated word.
You always, if you don't keep.
Yeah, but it's only if you make a netter. Yeah, because otherwise you didn't really make a netter. That's why we say beli netter. Why I say beli netter? Because I may not fulfill it. But if you make it with a netter, you have to fulfill it. That's exactly the Torah's emphasizing. A word is a word. You have to keep your word. So kol kinui is like where I didn't use lashon of carbon, but I used the substitute lashon. It's still a doraisa. The Ran explains it's still a doraisa, as we'll see, and it's very clear. Except there's a question: what is the kinui? What do we mean by a substitute? Is it a substitute like you use an English word? I said a vow or an oath. I didn't say it in Hebrew. Is that what it is? It's a lashon, but it still has the same power and the same effect. Because like Tosa said, Ron says, what is lashon? We agree this is how we're going to talk. We make up a language, English, Hebrew, even modern Hebrew. We make up words all the time, right? We make up words that are missing. So what is the lashon haskama? It's just a question of what it is. So the Ron says that the king is also a neder gomer midaraisa. So that's the second thing. There's a regular netter, ikur netter. Then there's the kinui, the substitute, which could either be a foreign language, or there's a machlokas. Is it a foreign language, or is it a special word that the Chacham made up? In other words, instead of the word carbon, we'll use the word konach or some other word. The Mishnah we're going to have on Daf Yomi Hashem next week talks about Omer konem, konach, konas. What are those words? So he says that's a lashon. It's either a mistake, like a shibush, you didn't say the word right, or Dafka the Chacham said, don't use the word carbon, because we're afraid carbon is carbon Lashem, and you might say Hashem without saying the carbon at all, without making a netter. You'll say Hashem's name in vain. So the rabbis chose that. So that's also, but either way, it's a substitute, either foreign language or the Chacham made it up. Either way, that's called the kinui. So the Mishnah Tzarsa. Then there's a third thing. Third thing is where you didn't even finish the sentence, so to speak. You truncated your words. You didn't say it's usher to me like a carbon. You didn't even say it's usher to me. You just use some strange lashon or some truncated or abbreviated lashon. So the Mishnah is going to really mean all of them. Kol kinui nadarim kedadarim. Even a substitute is like an netter itself, has the same power and effect. V'charamim kecharamim. The Ran learned chayrim usually means that you give something to Bedek Abayis or to a coin. Two kinds of chayrims that we talked about in Kachim. The Ran says that the chayrim we were talking about is also just a regular neder of Isra, not a neder of Hegdish. We're not talking about Hegdish. This Masechet is not talking about a makdish something to Hashem, makdish something to Bedek Abayis, or for Kedushas Aguf as a carbon. We're talking about Nidre Isser, something which I prohibited something on myself, or I prohibit my item on you. But generally, we're talking here about I prohibit something on me. And Chayrim was also, Ron learns, as opposed to most other Rishonim, that Chayrim really means Chayrim when you give something Bedek Abayis. There also, if you give something, you have to fulfill your word. You can't dismiss what you said. But the Ran learns no. Chayrim over here is also a kind of a nidre isser. You said it in lashon of net instead of netter. Use lashon of chayrim, meaning this thing is banned to me. It's usher to me. Ushvuas kishvuas. Now, interesting here, the Masechet is Nadarim, but we mention all of them. The kino of a netter is like a netter, the kino of a chayrim is like chayrim, the kino of a shvu is like a shvu, and the kino of a nazir is also like a nazir. Let's say I didn't use lashon of nazir, I said some other lashon, another substitute, has the same effect. Okay, now, we didn't tell you what kinuyim are. Later on, we just said in the Mishnah and Daf Yomi, it tells us what a kinui is. I said konech, some other lashon of carbon. But the Gemara now goes on, the Mishnah goes on to explain what is a yad. A yad means a handle. I didn't say the whole thing. It's just like a handle that I pick up the vessel with. It's just a handle. It's a shortened version, a truncated or abbreviated lashon. What is that? I tell somebody else, mudrani mimcha, I am prohibited from you. Mudrani, I'm debarred from you, like with a vow. I am debarred from you. How? In what sense? In what sense? We're not going to court over here. What does that mean? I'm prohibited from you in what sense? I'm separated from you. I'm far away from you. I'm removed from you. And then he goes, what does that mean? With any of those lashonos, either Modrani or Mufrashani or Murchakani, then I added on Sha'ani Ochelecha, of any food that I'm going to eat from you that's prohibited to me. He didn't say it too clearly. He didn't lose the lashon of like a carbon. You didn't lose the lashon of Isser. You just said it in an abbreviated form, because you started with Midrani, Mufrashani, Mufrakani, and then you ended off with, but I'm going to eat from you, I'm going to taste from you, Shani Tom Lecha. And Ran points out, some of the girsa, like we just said, that I eat from you, some of this is Sha'ani, that I will not eat from you or taste from you, anything like that. Either way, that's those Shani Tom Lecha, all those are usher. All those are usher, and those are yad. Notice, so the Mishnah in the first two lines said that a kinui, a substitute, is like a netter itself. That's a substitute. It's like the ikar netter. Then he went on to explain ha'omer examples, not of a kinui, we used a different lashon, but an abbreviated lashon, what we call a yad, a handle. I didn't say the whole thing. I truncated it. I didn't say this is usher to me like a netter or like a carbon or anything like that, or use some other lashon. I just said, you know what? I am prohibited from you, anything that I eat from you, but I didn't use the lashon of neder, and I didn't say even the lashon of isser. I just used a strange lashon. I am prohibited. I'm separated. I'm debarred from you in some way. He didn't use it. That's all. That's also usher to speak as a netter, and that's a yad. We'll explain the difference between a kina as a substitute and a yad as a truncated version. Let's say he says menuda ani lecha. I am banned from you, like I'm in nidui, right? Like I'm in chayrim. I'm in a nidui from you. Rabbi Akiva was inclined to say that is also a lashon that's prohibited, right? It's not clear, but that's that he inclined to say that also involves an isser. Okay, if inclined doesn't necessarily that's the halacha. So if he was over on that and he did it on purpose, maybe he wouldn't get malchus. Or there are times when there's a carbon involved. Okay, so this is what and also, by the way, the Ran points out, there's a lot of Ran over here. Rashi it's called Rashi. When you have to say it's Rashi, it's probably not. We always know Rashi's on the inside. In Ran, generally, it's assumed that the Rashi here is not the real Rashi. So generally in yeshivas, they learn the Ran. We say even if it's not the Rashi himself, it's certainly a Rishon, who is at that time, certainly has strength to it. But the yeshivas in general learn the Ran. The problem with the Ran is that it's very verbose, because the Ran is like a combination of Rashi and Tosfos. He says both the Pshat, and he also has kashas and answers and things like that, so it's a little bit long. But one of the things that the Ran points out on this daf is that since we say shvuas just the way it is, without saying Hashem's name, you don't need Hashem. You don't have to say, I swear by God, like swear on the Bible. You don't need that to make a shvur. You don't need that. That's one of the things that the Ram points out, and he goes into all the briefs about that. Okay, so what is the Gemara? The Gemara at the beginning, the Gemara deals, like it does with many Masechtas, with what I call the housekeeping. Why did it say it in this form? What's not in terms of even the halacha so much as what's the order over here? Why did he say it in this way? So again, if you look at the beginning of Nazir, does anybody have a Nazir in the beginning of the first page of Nazir? Usually it's you don't, if the yard scroll probably doesn't have it, yours might have it, Moshe, that you have Nadarim, Nazir, and Sota in one volume. The beginning of Nazir starts off in a similar way. But it says Kol Kinuya Nazirus Kedazirus. Remember, our Mishnah started off with Kol Kinuya Nadam Kedam, Chamacham, Shvus Gush, Nazirus Kedazirus. All four things are mentioned here. Beginning of Nazir, it just says Kol Kinuya Nazirus Kedazirus. And then he goes on to give examples, Omer, Hares, and Nazir, like a Yad, where you gave it an abbreviated lashon. So the Gemara first asks, okay, what's the difference? Why is the beginning of the Nadarim, the first Mishnah, different than the Mishnah Nazir? You didn't say all the things by Nazir, you just mentioned Nazir. You didn't mention Nadarim and Haram and Shvuas. And why at the beginning of the Nadarim did you mention all these four? It says, as we mentioned before, the beginning of Matos, what does it say? Ish ki yidor neder Lashem, oh he shava shvua. Right? And then it goes to be Isha, Kisir, another Isha, it talks about a woman and a daughter and all that, all those rules. So Neder and Shvua are written right next to one another in the pasuk. They're juxtaposed, and therefore we mentioned Tani Tartan. So we mentioned not only Nadarim, but we also mentioned Shvuas because Shvuas and Nadarim are mentioned in the pasuk in one pasuk together. Keeping the Tani Tartan, once you mentioned these two, Tani Lakula, so we mentioned the other ones also, the other kinds of Nadarim, like a Cherim or like a Nazir. A Nazir is really a kind of a Neder. So that's why in our Mishnah we mentioned all four. And on Nazir, we're only talking about Nazir, so we only mentioned Nazir. Okay, that's fine. But listen to Kino Shvuos. Listen to Kino Shvuos. Pardon?
I'm confused. Nazir is very specific.
No, a Nazir, right.
It's very specific.
Right.
You know exactly. Either you did make yourself a Nazir or you didn't make yourself a
Nazir. No. It's not that simple. By Nazir also, you have Kinuyim and Yan. I thought you meant
a Nazir or not.
You either Nazir or not, right?
Which make you a Nazir or not.
Right.
So what's your more question?
No. Why no? So again, here we're talking about Nadarim.
Right.
So just say Kol Kinuyim Nadarim Nadarim, and that's it. By Nazir, the first Mishnah in Daf Beis in Nazir, it says Kol Kinuyim Nazirus Kenazirus. Period. Then it goes on to explain what the yad is, what the kinui is, etc. Right. Why in our Mishnah do we not only mention the Nadarim, but we also mention Charamim and Shvuas and Nazirus? Why? Like, why did you bother? You mention Nazirus here. In Nazir, you mention Nazir alone. That's it. Here you're talking about Nadarim, so just mention Nadarim. Why did you say not only Kol Kinuyim Nadarim, but also Charamim and Shvuas, Kishvuas, and Nazirus? Because why'd you mention all four? So he says the reason because the pasuk talks about Nadarim and Shvuas together in one pasuk. So we mention Nadarim and Shvuas, and once you mention Nadarim and Shvuas, so we mention the other ones also. Once you're mentioning more than one, even though here we're only dealing with Nadarim, we're not dealing with Shvuas over here. The Ran has another whole lashon here, whole thing. If you say a shvua that this item is also to me. If you say it in a different lashon, if you say neder and you say it, I'm making a neder that I want this, that I am also to this. You say neder, but you use a lashon of chayfetz. Again, the difference between a neder and shvua is a neder is on the chayfetz. Gemara is going to say that in a second, and the shvua is on the person. What happens if you reverse it? So that's also a shalom rishonim. Is it a good neder or not? But in any case, nedarim is Isser Chayfetz, Shvuah is Isser on the Gavra. So why did you mention Shvuah over here? We're talking about Nadarim. This is Mesechus Nadarim. Why did you mention Shvuah? Why did you mention Nazirus? Nazirus has its own Mesech. The answer is Nadir and Shvuah. Neder and Shvuah mention one pasuk, so we mentioned two of them. So once you mention two of them, more than one, you mention all of them. Okay. But listening Kinoi Shvuah Basar Nadarim. So if that's the case, what did you just say? You said the reason why you mentioned all four of them is because Neder and Shvuah are in one pasuk, right? So you mentioned Neder and Shvuah in the Mishnah, and then you say the other ones. So say Neder and Shvuah together. The order of the Mishnah was Kol Kinuyim Nadarim Nadarim, and then the Charam was you should say Shvuas together with Nadarim. If the reason is because the pasuk, why did you say Shvuas number 3? Why didn't you say number 2? Well, listen, Shvuas Basar Nadarim. So I did turn Nadarim the mitzvah cheftzalei. Since you mentioned Nadarim, where the item is also to me, Tananami Charamim. So we mentioned Charamim the mitzvah cheftzalei because that's also mitzvah chayfet. This item is also to me like a chayram. Also to me like a cherem. So you're talking about Isser Chefza, but Puki Shvua, to excluding a Shvua, the also not shame Chefza, because as I said, the Shvua is not an Isser Chefetz, it's an Isser Gavra. You answered yourself on the item. And by Nazir also, you're answering yourself on the item. You're answering yourself on wine and becoming tamei, growing your hair, etc. Okay. So So that's the reason for the order. Okay, fine. Now that explains why we said all four in the Mishnah, what was the order of those four. But in those first two lines in the Mishnah, we said substitutes. You're talking about kinui. Then, like we said when we learned the Mishnah, he could also explain not a kinui. That's not a kinui. It's a yad where I didn't finish the words. Ha'omer lachaver mudrani mefreshani mochakani shani ochalcha. You didn't use lashon of carbon. You didn't lashon of iser at all. It's still aser. That's a yad. That's an abbreviated or a truncated version. You didn't finish all of your words. So you're talking about kinuyim, and then you give examples of yad. How does that work? So he says pasach b'kinuyim. You start off by talking about the kinui. The substitute is also called kinui nadarim, and then mafarish yados, and then you don't even mention yad. You start to explain what a yad is. There's three different things here. There's an ikr neder, there's a kinui, and there's a yad. So you start off by talking about kinui, and then you give an example of yad. How does that make sense? And the Ran again explains that obviously something's missing over here, but usually when something's missing in the middle, not at the beginning. So when you start off by saying kol kinui nadarim kenadarim, so give an example of kinui. When do we start about the examples of the kinui is only in Daf Yud. Only Daf Yud in the Mishnah is the Mishnah in Daf Tes is part of the Mishnah in Daf Alf. It's like and Daf Beis. It's one thing, but the examples of kinui is only on Daf Yud. Omer like the next Mishnah, kinui lekarbon, kinui lecherem. The kinuyim are given later on. Here in our Mishnah, you said these are the kinuyim or kinuyim, and then he gives an example of yad without even mentioning yad. What's going on? That's a yad. Vesu yados inshi. He forgot even to mention. He forgot yados to mention at all. Now, there's one thing to say, I gave it in the wrong order. I have A, B, and C, right? And here is A, here is B, here is C, or here is C, here is B, here is A. But here I said A, and then I started explaining B without even telling it there is such a thing as B. I didn't even mention that there is such a thing. See those things you forgot? The answer is no. Ayir Bahan. He is talking about yadas. It's missing in this form. The kinuyim, the substitute of a netter, is like a netter, and the handle, the yad of a netter, is also like a nedarim. Okay, so it's missing those words. In other words, from our mission to say kol kinuyim kenedarim, the yados nedarim kenedarim, and then kinui cherem is like a cherem, and yados cherem is like a cherem. Either you said the yados after all four of them, after all the kinuyim, or you mentioned kinu yad. But it's missing. Okay, you're right. Something's missing from the Mishnah, not the beginning words. The beginning words is called kinu kenedarim, and then it's the yados nedarim. The yados is also there. So, and then he goes to explain the yad. Okay, so v'lifrish kinuyim bereisha. So now we come to this question. If I say, listen, gentlemen, I have two things I want to explain to you, A and B. Which one do I explain first, A or B?
Sometimes it's B.
Oh, sometimes it's B. Sometimes it's B. Good point. That's exactly Michael. Michael just gave you the whole answer for the whole Gemara. All right. So v'lifrish kinuyim bereisha. So why didn't you explain A first? If you said here's A and here's B, I'm going to talk to you about A and B. And now I'll explain one of them first. Which one do you explain first, A or B? So why don't you explain A first? V'lifrish kinuyim bereisha. He says, no, who the solik mean A, who farsh bereisha. Like Michael says, sometimes the one that you end off with, I'm talking about A and B, and I'll explain B first. Kidditanan, where do we find that you do that? Many cases, we say this every Friday night. What oils do you light with? What don't you light with? Right? We explain all that. So here's an example. You say A and B, and I'm going to explain B first. Another example. And what are you allowed to store? In what form? The oven, the sand, the hot sand. In what do you store food on Shabbos that you're allowed to store food without cooking it? You're allowed to cook on Shabbos, but what are you allowed to store with, and what are you not allowed to store in? Ein Tomnin, the Mishnah over there in Shabbos, it says you can't store it in this. So you see, it said A and B, and explain B. And with what the jewelry or costumes is a woman allowed to go out with on Shabbos, and what is she not allowed to go out with? Meaning, what's considered her clothing, and what do we say that she shouldn't go out with because maybe she'll take it off and show it to somebody, might come to carry it in the street. It says, what clothing or jewelry costume can a woman go out with on Shabbos, and what can she not go out with? And then he explains, lo teitze isha. she shouldn't go out with, no, we've explained B first. What can she go out with? That's A. And what can she not go out with? That's B. And then he explains, what does he explain? B first. Lo teitzi, she shouldn't go out with these things. So you see, you do explain B before A. So the Gemara says, okay.
But the mission of the way that the story answer it still doesn't really follow properly because it does here. All of these cases are cases where it says ain madlikin, ain yotzi. Our mission, the way even adding what doesn't say that.
No. It's not the aim that we're emphasizing. It's not the yotzi. It's the second thing. The second thing.
But at least there you understand what you're talking about. Ain madlikin.
Right.
Is ain madlikin.
Right. No, but here, with the Chsur Mechsra, he says that here, and then he explains it. He didn't say here are the others. Yeah, he doesn't say what it is, but it's understood. The Mishnah is also a yad. The way he explains it is also a yad. It's understood that what are the yados? The yados nadarim kinadarim, and here is the yados ha'omer mudrani mecha, etc., etc. So he's explaining B first. So he says, here you have three examples.
Explain what a kinui is even.
Kinu is going to explain later on.
But I'm saying the Mishnah doesn't.
Okay, no. The Mishnah says substitutes are substitutes and handles are like handles. That's what it says. And then it explains handles first. Why does it say the second one first? He says, no, many times, like Michael says, often we have A and B, and we explain B first. Remember, and there's other examples also, even where it's not lo teitze or lo this. So the Gemara says, so you're saying it happens when you say A and B, we explain B first. And is that always the case? Is that universal that we always explain B first? The one that you start with A is not explained first. Many times I'm going to show you where A is explained first. But there are some people who inherit from and they inherit to, like a father and a son. A son inherits from his father, but if the son dies first, the father inherits from him. And there are people who inherit but don't inherit too. For example, you inherit from your mother. If your mother died, you inherit from your mother. Let's say she didn't have a husband, because her husband was first. But let's say she didn't have a husband, you inherit from your mother. But if you die, your mother does not inherit from you. It goes to the father's side, doesn't go to the mother at all. Okay. The Elu Nochemachin goes on to explain Nochemachin like a son and a father. So here you see where A is explained first. Nochemachin, Nochemachin. Elu Nochemachin explains A first. Yesh Mutas B'Alei Masursi Ben. We had in Yavamas not too long ago, right? There are some people who are mutter to their husband. Let's say a Kohen marries an almana. Is that mutter? A Kohen can marry an almana. But let's say his brother's the Kohen Gadol. And if the Kohen dies with no children, the Kohen Gadol's brother can't make even because he can't marry an almana. If the brother, the Yavam, is a Kohen Gadol, that's reverse. Let's say the husband's a Kohen Gadol and he gets engaged to an almana. You can't do that. But if it's a good marriage, and then he dies, then his brother, who's a regular Kohen, could marry her. Then she's also to the husband, and to the Yavam. And the following, he gives an example of A, the one who's mutter to the husband, right? That's just, for example, the husband's a Kohen. Kohen can marry an almana. He can't marry a gush. He can marry an almana, and he can't marry the Yavam because he's a Kohen Gadol. So he explains A first. There are some karbanos mincha that require both oil and frankincense, spices. Some require only oil without spices. But he explains A first. The Ran tells us what are the ones that need Shem Levona, that mincha solas, machvas, marcheshes. Shem Levona is minchas nesachim, does not require Levona. There are some karbanos that require, it's covered mincha usually, that you have to bring it near the mizbeach, to the southwest corner of the mizbeach, but don't need waving. Ain't tunas tenufa. Some require tenufa, some have waving below hagasha. And they tunas hagasha, and the following things require hagasha. And he gives an example. Well, she actually comes to what is an example of that? Tunas hagasha. Tunas hagasha is minchas chote. Minchas chote. If a sinner brings a mincha because he can't afford an animal or a bird, he brings a minchas chote. And that requires hagasha, bringing it up, but not waving. Tenufa ve'ein tuna hagasha is log shemen of mitzora. Shamo and bikurim requires waving but not bringing near to the Mizbeach. Again, you explain A first. So again, many examples where A is mentioned, A is explained before B. Here's an interesting one. When are you a Bechor to get a double share from your father, but you're not a Bechor for a coin? If, let's say, your mother had several miscarriages first, right? You're the firstborn son as far as double share, you get a Bechor Nachla, but you're not firstborn to mother, so you don't need Pidyon Aben because she had miscarriages first. Sometimes you're Bechor Coin, you're not Bechor Nachla. For example, let's say your father was previously married, he had other sons, and now he marries your mother. For your mother, it's the firstborn, she's a Petarechem, right? So he has to need a Pidyon Bechor, right? You need a Pidyon Bechor. You have to go, the coin has to need a Pidyon Bechor. Pidyon Aben. But you're not Bechor L'Nachla. Bezo Bechor L'Nachla. What's Bechor L'Nachla? Ain't Bechor L'Kohen, like we explained. So there are many cases here where A is explained before B. So how does that work? You said B is explained before A, like in our Mishnah. Here, many examples where A is explained before us. It says Halem Yishum Da'am Shalom Mefarsha Hu the Pasuk Reisha. In those cases, there are many cases of A, meaning when there's A and B. And there are many cases of A, so you want to explain all of A before you get confused with B, because there's many cases, and it's very confusing. We don't want to get mixed up. There's many dinim, there's many halachos there. If you explain it in reverse, explain B before A, you'll come to make a mistake, and you might not include everything.
Know what A is.
Yeah, we're explaining what A is.
No, I'm saying if you do certain case like A Madweek, that's simple.
Right.
But in these cases, if you didn't put A first, you wouldn't know what if you just started explaining B and you didn't understand A.
No, you understand what it is. Listen, it needs.
How would you know what it means?
Okay. Yes, some people inherit from their father,
but you don't know what that means. Right?
No, you know what it means. You don't know the cases. You know what it means. I inherit from, but I don't inherit to.
But who are we talking about?
Yeah, that's the explanation. That's the case. No. It says which oil can I use? Yeah.
Right. So because we're talking about oil.
Yeah. Okay. The kinds of oil, cotton, whatever. Okay. What do you want to talk about? No, it's the same. It's the same thing. I know I can inherit from, but I don't inherit to. What are the cases? Yeah, you could say there's the two aspects to each case, but still, the question is, we know what it means. Some need Hagasha, some don't need Hagasha. What are the cases? What are the korbanos? It's not that complicated, not that different than the Meishiyot. So yeah, what can she wear? What can't she wear? Okay, we need to know what those items are. So here you're saying, the reason why you say A first is because A has many dinim involved. In the case where what can an animal go out with and what can he not go out with, we say over there, the low option, there's not a lot of cases in the A, and you start explaining A first. Remember, the ones we said is but the case of Yotza, which is another Mishnah in Shabbos, says the low option, there's not a lot of things over there, not a lot of dinim. It's pretty simple what the animal can go out with. And still you say A first. You're saying now that A is only mentioned first when there's a lot of dinim. Here's a case where there's not a lot of dinim, and still A is first. Ella, the top of Gimel, Ella lav dafka. It's lav dafka. Come back to what Michael said. Zidin farshu the pasuk reisha. Sometimes you start with A, the zim now with the pasuk farshu. Sometimes you explain the one that you started with, and sometimes you explain the ones that you ended with. It's lav dafka. Depends on the Tana. Sometimes he chose to explain A, sometimes A, which really solves all the cases. So you could say, fine. In this Mishnah, he chose to explain B first. B wasn't even mentioned. No, Chsur Mechzer was mentioned. Kolkinu Nadarim Kadadarim, Makol Yodos Nadarim Kadadarim. And then he explained B. That's one answer. B-boy saying another answer. Yodos, ID the Asa Midrasha, Mefarsh Liberation. In other words, it's like we have in Yavamas also. Because it's learned out of Midrasha, it was more we wanted to explain that one first. What do you mean? Not that it's not the Doraisa. As we said before, an Iker net is Doraisa, Kinu net is Doraisa, and Yados is also learned out of Psukim, but it's not Beferish. It's not Beferish because a substitute is also like it's just a different lashon, different language. If I say something, Gemara and Sota, right, that you could say many things in the Torah. You could say it in any language in the vernacular too, if you don't understand the Hebrew, right? So it's you're Yosef the same way. It's a daraisa. So here too, if the lashon of kinu is simply a substitute lashon, that's also a daraisa, but that's not a drasha. The yad, how do we know that yad works at all? Maybe that's not a netter. Unless I say the whole thing, it's not a netter. That's we're going to see slowing down of a drasha. So he says, yados, the truth is, yeah, he's not going back from the first answer in the sense that, yes, many times the Tana chooses to explain A first, sometimes he chooses B first. That's true. But in this case, there's an extra reason why he explains B first. Why? Because yad is only learned out of a drasha, mefarish lahu bereisha, right? Mefarish lahu bereisha, he explains that first. So v'liftach hadei bereisha, so explain kinui first. That's also drashas. No, miftach pasuk kinui into oraisa, because that's the oraisa. Not that yad is not the oraisa, but it means that the kinui is definitely the oraisa because it's beferish, bereisha. V'hadam farish yados to aslam midrasha. And then he explains yados, which is learned out of a drasha, meaning it's not beferish in the Torah. Kinui is like beferish because that's a netter. It's just a different lashon. So the Gemara is going to now say, we'll pick it up from here tomorrow. They're going to say, that's fine if you say that kinu is simply a different language, like it's like explaining it in English or Greek. It's a substitute lashon. So I understand it's just like an error, just in a different lashon. But if you learn that kinu is not a different language, it's a lashon that the chachamim chose to use that. Don't use the word carbon, use the word konech or konem or something like that. So you shouldn't come to say Hashem's name without saying the netter. If it's that, isn't that also out of a drush? It's lashon chachamim, so it's not beferish in the Torah. So how do you explain that? Why don't you say kinui also before you explain yados? In other words, we're saying yes. Sometimes you say A first, sometimes you say B first. But over here, because of the second answer, we chose to say B first because yados is learned out of a drasha, so he chose to explain that first. But isn't kinui also learned out of a drasha? So this is what the Gemara is going to get to. We'll pick it up from here tomorrow. Have a good day.
The reason you need to